So not at any stage do we consider coming off the pitch, well, I wonder what social media is saying about the game and whether that's good, bad or ugly, because we trust our process. It's pretty watertight in terms of credibility and making sure that we're addressing the right things that we need to address post-game in a review. Both learnings that were good, but also decisions that were wrong, and we need to make sure that we've got a decent process in place on how we don't make that same mistake again, which is what it's all about.
Hi guys, welcome to Fab Rugby. You join me, Craig, and Will from Young Rugby as we start a brand new series ahead of the new season. In this series, we'll be looking behind the scenes at some of the people that you might not know about.
Yeah, in this series, we'll be having a look at some behind the scenes players and staff from all over the Premiership to find out what they do on a day-to-day basis. Well, hello and welcome back to Fab Rugby, and we've got an amazing lineup for you today. I'm delighted to be joined by Craig, obviously, from Fab, and Luke Pearce. Hello, Luke. How are you? You well?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, no problem. Well, this series sort of outlines the people behind the scenes in rugby and the people who we don't typically see on the pitch.
Although we
Luke,
do, I should add that we do
although
kind
we
of
do see
Luke
you on the pitch. Yeah, that is true. But Luke, would you just mind, as a referee, just sort of outlining what your typical week looks like? Leading up to a Saturday game, let's say.
I'll run you through like a typical Premiership week, because that's probably the easiest and the most common thing that we do. A normal week for us, pre-COVID, would have been to be at Twickenham on a Monday and Tuesday. That's obviously to train and to review the games from the previous weekend. Wednesdays are normally a down day, and then Thursday then is prep ahead of weekend's games, whether it be Friday, Saturday or Sunday, and travel built in that as well. So that would be a kind of norm for a Premiership pre-COVID. Since the restart in August, we kind of adapted that. So a lot of it is done on Skype calls like this, or we're trying to review as groups on calls instead of obviously getting together and travel. That does change things, and where things really get different is for international. So we're in the middle now of Six Nations restart, ahead of the final weekend this weekend, and then ahead of the Autumn Cup, which kicks off in a few weeks' time. And that's very much different because we then got international travel to consider, and it's normally then weekends away. So, for example, I'm TMO this weekend for Wayne in France, and it means leaving Friday morning and getting back Sunday evening. So we try and build in around that, the review system. We try and make sure that by the time we get home on Sunday, that the game is hopefully boxed off and we can consider any learnings, anything that we need to kind of think about we've already done before we get back to the airport.
How did you kind of get into refereeing? Was it something you always wanted to do, or is it kind of you used to play, or how did you end up being an international referee?
So my dad refereed up until the championship level. So when I was a kid growing up, I normally had to follow him around the country because there was nowhere else to go. Mum was working, so I was used to watching him ref. And on a Sunday then at my local club at Exeter Saracens, we were often short of referees once we got to under 15 level, because that was when we needed neutral or a non-coach referee a cup game or whatever game may be. So I tried my hand at that, gave it a go, and enjoyed it. I alternated for a couple of years where I did both playing and refereeing, obviously playing at a low level. But when I get to about 18, 19, I realised that if I want to establish my career in refereeing, that I needed to give it a good go. So I stopped playing and gave my all at refereeing, and just slowly climbed the ladder of domestic rugby within England. And before you know it, even in the job 10 years, and it's kind of like any career, I guess, that never saw it coming all those years ago. But now I've been doing it quite a while. It seems I can't imagine doing anything else at the moment.
And in those 10 years, sort of a referee's role has changed drastically. And I kind of want to touch upon sort of your role with players. It seems to be sort of constantly adapting and to become more of like a player manager rather than a referee. Sort of how do you tackle your relationship with players and keep that discipline on the pitch, especially in like high stakes sort of international matches?
Well, I'd say that obviously rugby and refereeing has got some key pillars, and we can't get away from like the technical aspects of scrum, the breakdown, the line out. And we've got a law book that we have to enforce. But I would say that the biggest part of refereeing is communication and management. And that then comes under that player relationship. And you're right, it does change. And I think familiarity is often something that brings about in the Premiership, because we're used to seeing the same players and refereeing them. Very rarely will we do them week after week, but we certainly would see the same team at least 3 or 4 times in a season. And then plus you're with them in England camps, or you might be with them in a different training environment. So you do get that familiarity, and you get that ability then to speak to anyone like they want to be spoken to in any walk of life. And I think that's where rugby's still very lucky, in that we've got that ability for everyone to hear our conversations, because that respect element is still there. I don't doubt for 1 minute that we were on a bit of a slippery slope a couple of years ago, where we were probably letting too much go in terms of the values of the game and trying to make sure they were still in place. But I think credit where it's due to everyone in its role, whether it be referees, players, the coaches. Everyone kind of realised that and addressed it. And I think it's in a much better place now than it was a couple of years ago. And long may that continue, that people can hear, both the public can hear our conversations with players and coaches, but also that we can have that ability to have that relationship, because that's the vast majority of us referee because we enjoy it, and we enjoy having that relationship with the players. Of course, it's not all good at one stage or another. If you're giving a red card, or you're giving a hard decision that is going to cost a team a game, or that the stakes are on certain matches. But that's the joy of sport, and competitive people will often, in the heat of the moment, react differently to when they're off the pitch.
Well, I just want to talk about, you kind of mentioned it there, but like sort of making one of those in the moment sort of game changing decisions. How do you deal with that sort of post match, sort of evaluating as a team of referees, and especially now with the introduction of sort of social media, where anyone can have their say, and people on Twitter and Instagram can have a go at you, etc. Sort of how do you deal with that sort of pressure on the pitch?
I think first of all, you have to park the social media thing, and I'll touch on it in a second. We're professional as a unit. So in England, we've got our 9 professional referees, and we've got a professional review process with managers and coaches. And first of all, we identify anything that we need to address in game with that system and with that process. And then we touch on the social media side. And look, there's no doubt about it. Social media has been probably the biggest change since I've been in the job for 10 years. TMOing being closely after that, whereas a few years ago to the TMO was clearly the big change. And social media, it can be great and it can be awful. And I think everyone's aware of that. Everyone on social media, if you want to be on there, as I am, and there's other referees are and some aren't, if you want to be on these platforms, you have to take the good with the bad. And that's not saying that all we do is attract negative comments, and all we do is we just bat away some of these horrible insults that you sometimes get. It's also ensuring that the lines of communication can still be open. And for example, with you guys on here, our communication was brought together because of social media. So that's got to be a good thing.
Now, obviously with COVID, we've got no fans in grounds. I wanted to ask you what it was like refereeing without fans for the first time again. Was that quite? Because obviously you've gone from the World Cup, like huge audiences, to then no fans and it being silent in grounds. How has it been to do, to cope with that? And is it actually a benefit for you guys as a referee, because you don't get stick from the terraces so much?
Yeah, it's been probably the biggest change since we've come back to restart, the consideration of no crowds. And I think, again, you have to divide it between, once you blow the whistle and the game starts, it's exactly the same. Yes, you don't get those loud moments where you get crowd reaction, and that can have an impact on certain other bits and bobs. But, like last weekend when I was on touch for Matt Carley over in Ireland, the strangest thing was the pre-match anthems, the stood around with silence, the waiting with no noise. That's the most weird part. But once you blow the whistle, the games have, I think, slowly got back to that intensity where we were pre-restart. So once you're in that match, you become oblivious to what's going on outside. I know it sounds a bit of a cliche, but you genuinely do. Again, it's just when you turn that time off, or you blow your whistle for a quick water break and you look around and there isn't anyone there, is when it's very, very different. I mentioned about how that affects certain bits and pieces, there'll be normally flashpoints, and it can affect it in a good and bad way. But if there's a flashpoint in a game that's the crowd will be incensed about, obviously you're aware of it because you hear that loud roar from the crowd. Now, sometimes that helps a referee because it brings your attention to something that you may not have seen or considered. But also sometimes it might be something that's just play on and there is nothing to look at, or there is no foul play, or nothing has happened. And then as a ref, you seem to have to explain why you're not dealing with something that the crowd are going bananas about. So, it can have a two impacts really. But, one of the big things, I think everyone's kind of been pretty vocal about it, is it's not the same game without the crowd there. And the whole experience, from whether it be refereeing, whether it be warming up before the game, having a sip of water during it, when you're setting a scrum, to have no noise is pretty eerie. And whilst it's been fantastic to get rugby back on the telly and back working again, we need those crowds back now to, not just for the obvious finance reasons that's been well published, but also for that kind of rugby feel about going to a game and having that camaraderie with everyone in the stadium as well.
How would you advise any young people watching who are looking to get into a refereeing sort of career or role in their club or higher up? How would you advise they go about sort of making that a reality?
Look, I can only give my example of what I did, and I never intended this to be my career when I first started. But you got to go into these roles with a realistic view on what you want to achieve. And yes, of course, everyone will have ambitions of dreams and making it to the highest level and becoming your career, or going to a World Cup, or playing for England, or whatever it may be. But to me, if you start being involved in rugby in whatever capacity and whatever level, you just enjoy doing it. And refereeing is such a job that the more games you do at that entry level, and when you first start, the more experiences you get exposed to. So then if things happen higher up the level, you've already been exposed to it and you know kind of the response to give and what to do. Whereas if you try and rush through and your only ambition is on, getting straight to the top level, you could easily miss out on those learnings. But also, I go back to when I first started, one of the most enjoyable parts when I first started, and also now when I have a weekend off, when we're back to normal, is being part of that rugby club feel. And whether that may be refereeing the seconds, thirds, or Colts, whatever it may be. But after the game, when you go into the clubhouse, you're having a bite to eat, you're having a drink, and you're socialising, you're chatting to people, and you go around the same clubs in your area. I'm in Devon, so I came to the Devon Referee Society, and you'd see and you'd visit the same club multiple times, and you get to know people. And it's that kind of enjoyment which will then lead you to perform better because you're enjoying yourself. Whereas if you have that pressure and externally thinking, oh God, I need this game to go well because I need to be climbing the ladder, then all that does is take away two things. It takes away that enjoyment, but it also puts more pressure, and the more pressure you put on yourself, the chances are you're not going to succeed at times.
So thanks a lot for joining us, Luke. It was great to learn a little bit more about what you do and the pressures of being an international referee in 2020. So good luck for the upcoming games, and we'll see you back in the Premiership very soon.
Thanks very much. Thanks, guys.